Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. Very excited that we have a sold-out event, and thank you all so much for being part of this conversation. I am Anahita Kopal, and I have the privilege of being the board president of nonprofit Westchester. We are here today to have a frank conversation about systemic racism, particularly as it relates to the nonprofit sector. Before introducing the impressive speakers and panelists who will be guiding us through that conversation this morning, I'd like to provide a little context for today's forum. As part of our work as nonprofits, we work every day to serve our communities and advocate for those who have less justice, less resources, and less opportunity. Much of this work involves undoing the effects of systemic racism on our communities. We battle every day to reverse the effects of unequal access to healthcare, failing schools, mass incarceration, inadequate housing, the digital divide, and so on. Many of our organizations serve large numbers of Black and brown individuals. Some of us pride ourselves on the racial diversity of our staff. For all of these reasons, we tend to think of ourselves as the good guys, that we, the nonprofit community, get it. But the report that NPW will formally launch on our website later today strongly suggests that our sector is not immune to the institutional racism that pervades most other American institutions. Despite having high percentages of people of color in our workforce, over 60%, at the senior-most levels and boards of our organizations, we are not that diverse. We don't pay that diverse workforce what we should, and we continue to accept funding models that perpetuate that inequity. Our staff of color don't feel that supported in their work environments, which means that we are diverse but not necessarily inclusive. In short, our attitudes may not be racist, but our actions are not sufficiently anti-racist to live up to the full promise of our missions and our ideals. We hope to start to change that today. The NPW Board of Directors and Executive Director made a conscious effort today to focus the program primarily on racism. Here's my understanding of why. As a woman, as the child of immigrants from India, as the mother of a gay son, as a woman with an unusual name and an even more unusual cultural background, and as a member of a little-known religious group, I understand, like each of you, that there are so many groups in our society that are subjected to harassment, discrimination, and even violence for being different. And we must all continue to speak out and stand up for the rights of every one of those groups. But in the history of our country, racism, the way that Black people have been treated since the beginning of slavery to the present day, stands alone in terms of the length, breadth, and depth of violence, injustice, and dehumanization of a group of people. The degree of our government involvement in perpetuating those injustices is also unique. Perhaps only the US government's treatment of Native American people parallels. We focus our discussion today on racism because despite it being at the core of our social and economic fabric for over 400 years, we have never adequately addressed it. Until we do so, the systems that were created to disadvantage Black people will continue to operate to disadvantage them and every other disfavored group in our society. As the sector whose job it is to level the playing field, dismantling those systems for the benefit of all people should be our work. A forum like this takes a lot of work and a lot of talent. I would like to start by thanking all of those individuals and organizations, many of you in the room, who participated in the NPW programs and conversations that culminated in the report, entitled Charting a Path, an Anti-Racist Path Forward for the Westchester Nonprofit Sector. These individuals and organizations are acknowledged in the report by name, and I hope you will all take a look later today. I would also like to thank all of today's panelists. They didn't just show up here today, they put in a lot of time and effort over the past several months planning today's sessions and content. I want to say a special thank you to Jan Fisher, our executive director, and the entire NPW team. I believe Jan is a model for allyship. She has been a driving force behind NPW's DEI efforts, our anti-racist programs, the report, and today's forum. Yet she makes sure the discussion is led by and focuses on the experiences of people of color. We are also especially grateful to the sponsoring organizations of today's event and their leaders, the United Way and their CEO, Tom Gabriel, the Westchester Library System and their Executive Director, Terry Kirshner, the YWCA of White Plains and Central Westchester and Dante Hudson, their Chief Program Officer, PCSB Bank, and their President, CEO, and Chairman of the Board, Joe Roberto. Please thank the sponsors. Finally, I would like to thank Pace University and their president, Martin Krislov, who had to leave us for an urgent phone call, for hosting us today, and for his team, particularly Jerry McKinstry, Kristen Vinciguerra, and Shannon Thyberg, for housing us today and their engagement and partnership in making today a success. Please thank them. And last but not least, I have the pleasure of introducing a longtime NPW friend and board member, Maria Imperial, now the Commissioner of the New York State Division of Human Rights since October of last year. Before that, Maria spent 14 years as the CEO of the YWCA of White Plains and Central Westchester, and has been a major partner in founding the Center for Racial Equity with NPW at the Y. Maria.
Thank you so much, Anna Haida. It's so wonderful to look out and see everybody's faces. I feel so much like I'm coming home, and they're beautiful faces to look at. It's really an honor for me to be here today to continue our journey charting an anti-racist path forward. I have to give a shout out, and I think definitely deserves another round of applause, to Jan Fisher. And vision, setting anti-racism as a priority for NPW and required work for all nonprofits, and of course the NPW Board of Directors for strengthening and supporting the work. I remember many years ago working with Jan to plan the creation of the YWCA Center for Racial Equity, and then the Racism is Killing Us series during COVID, leading up to today's event and the report. Jan, together with other inspirational nonprofit leaders, helped inform my ever-evolving human rights lens. It truly was eerie when the governor reached out to me to ask me to be the commissioner of the State Division of Human Rights, because I was beginning to really see all of my work through that human rights lens. I learned so many lessons from the women that I worked with. One lesson was that anti-racism work is very much about recognizing our common humanity, treating people with respect by virtue of the fact that they are human. And I have to thank Karen Cheeks-Volnex for that lesson. And the second was that the foundation of anti-racism work is healing and restoring our common humanity. And I have to thank Maria Smith-Dytrush for that lesson as well. So anti-racism work is very much aligned with seeing the world through a human rights lens. A human rights approach is a call to action that must guide and motivate nonprofit leadership. As nonprofit leaders, you must be willing to ensure that everyone has opportunity to participate fully without facing discrimination. And you must be willing to make systemic changes. This is basic to having a human rights approach. Anti-racism and human rights work must become an important anchor for the work of nonprofit organizations. Both are key to helping people and communities heal and uplift everyone. Let us begin. Thank you so much.
I also wanted to thank JGT Public Relations, Joan, Liz, Bonnie, and Gabby, who are here making all the audiovisual work, and for all their help in putting together the event. And now my last official duty, I'm here to introduce Michelle Nicholas, also an NPW board member and chair of our Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee. Michelle is also Senior Vice President, Chief Diversity Officer, and Director of Community Development at PCSB. Before joining PCSB, she was the Executive Director of the nonprofit Girls, Inc. Michelle.
Good morning. It's good to see the faces. So I got a task this morning, and I'm going to try to wearing heels today, so I'm a little bit taller. Thank you, Anahita, and everyone for being here. Good morning. The greatness of a community is most accurately measured by the compassionate actions of its members. Coretta Scott King. Like many of you, I believe that the work of nonprofits is the backbone for many of our communities. As a former executive director of a local nonprofit and serving currently at the lead for diversity, equity, and inclusion at PCSB Bank, I stand before you proud that we are here as a community committed to advancing racial equity throughout the Westchester County nonprofit sector. And for that, I thank each of you and PCSB Bank for supporting this important work, this important conversation. But what does it all mean? The racial disparities in death rates and health outcomes, educational resources, housing and workplace conditions, the growing digital divide, and the overall safety between Black, Brown, Asian people, and white people during the pandemic speaks to why advancing racial equity is vital. We know that so many organizations strive to create diversity and inclusion in the workplace, but the process could be daunting and, unfortunately, less than effective. Understanding this reality, NPW began a series of initiatives designed to bring real continues to collaborate with community partners to focus. We need to be committed, ready to challenge accepted assumptions, have uncomfortable conversations, and a commitment to racial equity in all agency systems. I thank the NPW board, staff, for recognizing that we needed to first do the work internally. Hence, prior to the pandemic and the public documentation of acts of brutality against Black people, we started the work internally by establishing the Racial Equity Committee to move the agency forward. The NPW board was supported to explore grounding definitions, and as shared before, we engaged the Y Center for Racial Equity. Becoming an anti-racist organization is only accomplished through intentional action and a willingness to change. The work must be done from the inside out. I will tell you that this is also the charge of PCSB Bank as a corporation to do this work from the inside out. The Taking Action, Chartering, and Anti-Racist Path Forward in Westchester's Nonprofit Sector report, a report that you will soon have, reflects the incredible partnerships, people, and organizations that have contributed to community learning over a multi-year period in Westchester. Take the time to read it, sit with it, breathe with it, offer resources, read it again, get involved. But ultimately, I encourage you to do something towards racial equity. The report is not the final chapter. In many ways, it is the beginning. And it is truly giving us a platform to do more. What does do more look like? I take this opportunity to invite our Black, Indigenous, and people of color nonprofit staff at all levels to attend the NPW peer-to-peer group which is being launched on May 19th. And speaking of the need to do more, I want to acknowledge and invite Dr. Alexandria Connolly, our equity and inclusion consultant, who has been working with the NPW Board and Racial Equity Committee, who has been helping us evolve throughout this process. Thank you all again for the conversation, for the opportunity, and let's do this together. Dr. Connolly.
It is good to be home. It is good to be home. I see so many faces that I know, too many to name. I do want to say thank you to NPW, the executive, the board, and Jan Fisher for giving me this opportunity. I am so excited. When Jan called me, I said, I can't do this. She said, you can do anything. And so I don't consider Jan an ally, I consider her a co-conspirator. She's willing to go down with the ship. This is not easy work. I also want to thank my sister in this battle, Michelle A. Nichols. Let's give a round of applause. She has toiled in this work, not only in this organization, but in so many other organizations that she dragged me to, I dragged her to. And the last person I would like to, oftentimes, I present at conferences or other organizations, and there are so many people behind the scenes that actually do the work, right? From making sure that I get up this morning to making sure I have tea. So I want to thank my assistant, Akila, don't leave. Just wave to the people. Thank you. This is who makes Alexandria Connolly. So just so you know, both of my parents are preachers. So there's a call and response. If you don't know what that is, some of y'all been to church, watching on TV, push your face. Got it. All right. And I'm also from the hip hop generation, so there's definitely call and response. All right. Lastly, I was a special ed teacher, so I have wait time. Just joking. I have to make sure you guys are awake this morning. So I consider it an honor to be up here. I grew up in Yonkers, Southwest Yonkers, if you know anything about Yonkers, School Street. Some of you like, they hired her. And Riverdale. Yes. Quarter of Yonkers 50% of Yonkers population is in that quadrant of the city, right? And it's the most impoverished part of the city, 10701 and 10705. If that wasn't enough, I was born to a single mother who died when I was a kid, so I grew up in foster care. So any social workers here? Clinical, thank you. Thank you. Give them a round of applause. Thank you. So we look at mental health sometimes in the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, as something that we shouldn't encounter. So, like I said, my name is Dr. Alexandria Connolly. I'm Afro-Latina. My pronouns are she, her, AI, and I am cisgender, and I am happy to be here with you. Like I said, I grew up in foster care in Southwest Yonkers, and so it was really my community that rallied around me, and the non-for-profits and the services that were offered to me that has made me the person I am today. I had a substitute teacher, her name was Mrs. Stewart, and she just saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. That woman would one day become the New York State majority leader, and she would take me along that trail with her. Opportunity and access matters. She pulled me off the basketball court and told me, Simba Brand is gonna be the first Black female councilwoman in Yonkers. Do you wanna help her? I was like, no, I wanna play basketball because I can't. And she figured it out real quick. She was like, there'll be pizza. So I did what any smart 8-year-old would do. I said, guys, there's pizza and soda. Let's go. That started my journey. Senator Cousins, who I often shout out, came to my dissertation defense when she had a contested election. When I had COVID, she was one of the first people that called me in the hospital. So this is about relationships, right, and access. Non-for-profits serve as a fundamental service in our society. And it serves to make the society a healthy organization, just like schools and churches. We need non-for-profit services to benefit our community. and really to close the achievement gap, the wealth gap, right? By giving access and opportunity. A healthy organization is based on individual and the collective belief, practices, policies, instructors that are part of it. We cannot have that in a racist organization or one who's not even working toward anti-racism, right? So let me just give me 2 seconds. Being anti-racist means you work against racism. It's not enough just to not be racist, right? Let me say this. Anybody here went to physical therapy, right? You hurt your back, you're in a car accident. That's being anti-racist, right? So if you don't need any help, right? If your arm is fine, or your leg is fine, and you're walking around, you don't need to go to a physical therapist, right? You don't need to work on anything. But if you injure a part of your body, you need to work on it, and you need somebody to help you with that. And so this is a constant journey toward anti-racism. Bettina Love speaks about this notion of abolitionist teaching. The work we do today will impact us today, but it will impact us and our children and our children's children 100 years from now. 100 years ago, the abolitionists that were helping primarily then African Americans were not thinking, oh, there'll be a black president and a black Southeastern vice president. They were just like, you guys, we're just doing the work. But the impact of the work today will count for generations to come. So understand that this work is hard and this work is weary. And when you feel like you can't push another second, understand that there's a generation on your back that you need to propel to its destiny. Does that make sense? Can I get an amen? Yeah. All right. So data and a lived experience. All right. I just wanted to see her do that. Data and a lived experience demonstrates the injustice that happens in society. Non-for-profits are not exempt. From the foundation of every institute in this society was racism. It was not built for diversity or inclusion. It was built to celebrate certain groups and marginalize other groups. There's a correlation between the historical racist policies and the inequities in society today, and that's the importance of a gatekeeper. How many people here think they're the gatekeeper? Every hand should be up. Every hand should be up. Undoing racism, if you've ever taken it, they talk about their principles as a gatekeeper. That's what you are. You are the person who has access and opportunity, and you determine who has access. Whether you're the CEO or the most important person in the corporation, the receptionist. I wouldn't know what I would do without my assistant. I wouldn't be here today. She told me, you have to show up tomorrow. Oh, show up, got it. I told him I had to go, just tell me what to do, right? Go to the front, sit down, got it. I got it, right? Some of you CEOs know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And so you're the gatekeeper, whether that's with your own children and your own family, whether that's in your community, whether that's on boards you sit on, you open the door for access and opportunity, and you decide who gets access and opportunity. Just understand that every time you have an interaction with somebody, we are all prone to be connected to people who look like us, believe like us, love like us, think like us, have the same religion, right? And so when we see people that are outside of those categories, it's not that we are mean to them, but we have inherent biases that we need to address. And so as an institution, we have to work on being an anti-racist institution. Really quickly, I'm going to go through this and then I'm going to sit down. So when we talk about the People's Institute, Ron Chisholm talks about this notion of what structural and systemic racism looks like. Individual racism is my personal policies, beliefs, or in the group. So this table was my group, and we believe a certain way, certain stereotype, that's really individual racism. Institutional racism is the policies, practices, and beliefs of any organization or institution. Schools, mental health, not-for-profits, right? Systemic racism is when all of those systems work together to marginalize certain groups and celebrate other groups. So Ron Chisholm tells this story. There's 3 sisters, they walk to the lake. They see babies in the lake. The first sister jumps in, she saves the baby, right? She saves them from individual racism. The other sister says there are more babies, so she teaches the babies how to swim, right? The third, that's institutional racism. The third sister goes to the top of the lake and stops the person throwing in the babies. That's systemic racism. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit, just a few minutes, about the actual report that you're going to be receiving, charting an anti-racist path forward in Westchester non-for-profits. So the report has a clear definition. It gives you essential questions and then a solution framework. Michelle talked about this is a living, breathing document. This is not the Constitution, right? Even though they amended the Constitution too, right? This is, so we're going to be asking for feedback on it. We're going to be asking it for it to grow. So this is not, don't take it and say, hey, Dr. Conley said do this, even though nobody ever said that in the history of the world. Don't say that this is what we have to do. Use what you can in this organization to benefit your organization, and then if you have feedback, give it to us, because we don't know your organizations like you do. So first we started with board governance. How do we promote racial diversity in board governance, right? Looking at diverse skills and abilities, the mission, reflecting on the community, identifying board members' skill set, training, recruitment, hiring practices. We also looked at beyond diversity and inclusion. Diversity is the makeup of your group, right? You can have a very diverse group. Inclusion measures the continuity and the collaboration within a group. Anybody read the book Where the Black Kids Sit in the Cafeteria? Diverse group, no inclusion. We need to be included to be able to move forward. And what that means is, how do people feel welcome, right? I hug Michelle. I probably won't run out in the audience and hug a bunch of you, right? Because of the relationship, right? And that's how we feel welcome. You may not like to be touched, right? So if I hug you, that's not how you feel welcome. We have to see how we like to interact with each other and know it's okay. How do we become more diverse in the decision-making process? Not only bringing people to the table, but actually honoring the voices of BIPOC people. Professional development, and have a formal process, right? Not just let's swing it. We also talk about capacity building, government, and foundational and funding foundations. How do we change the lens on our funders when they look at Black and brown organizations, right? How do we make the case that these organizations and this work will improve our society as a whole? When I wrote my dissertation, it was on the suspension of Pan-African students and the cultural discipline. And what I found out as I'm doing my research is that 75% of people incarcerated in state prisons in New York do not have a high school diploma. There's a correlation between high school graduations and suspension rates. Nationally, Black students are suspended disproportionality throughout the country. There's nowhere you go where Black students are not suspended disproportionality. In the middle of the country, it's more Native Americans, but throughout the country, so if Black students are suspended more, they will not get their high school diploma, and then they end up in incarceration. That's the case. So even if you don't like Black people, don't you want to save yourself some tax dollars? That's a selling point. I had this conversation in Long Island. They cared more about the tax dollars. I'm sorry, right? But that's a selling point. Some people, that's where you're going to get them. And my categories are all Long Island. There was just a conference I was at Long Island. People are going to start looking at Long Island, people are like, no, don't do that, right? And we also talk about the importance of funding this work. Capacity building, developing an infrastructure to support this work. We also discuss supporting leaders of color. If you want to build your workforce, I'm going to tell you the secret, don't tell anyone, all right? I'll tell everybody tomorrow. If you really want to build your workforce with Black, Indigenous, people of color, people of other religions, sexual orientation, you know what you do? You treat the people in your organization from those groups in a way they feel included and welcome. Because you know what they do? Don't be clap. I told you my parents are back. Because you know what they do? They go tell their friends, you're going to want to work here, right? You don't have to post anything. You get a job opening, you send it to your staff. If I like where I work, and actually, listen, guys, come, like with me, 8-year-old, hey, here's pizza. Same concept. Come work here. You want to work here, right? There's a book called The Green Book. It's where black people, when they traveled to the South, had to stay physically safe. They couldn't go everywhere. There's an unofficial green book that happens in organizations that says, you want to work for this person, you don't want to work for that person. I was in a system principal, there were 3 things we cared about. The parking, was there food around, and who the principal was. I didn't care if the kids were the best behaved kids, I didn't care if the teachers came to, I didn't care about that. Parking, can I get to my job? Food, will you feed me because I get hangry? And the person that I work for, do they care about me? All right? And so, how do we support leaders of color? We changed the hiring and recruitment practices. First thing I did is, I work at 9 public schools, and the first question they asked me is, tell me about yourself. I didn't even ask them, I just wrote down, because I was like, if I get this job, we're changing this whole system. Because someone that looks like me is conditioned not to talk about herself. A female of color, who defines themselves as Afro-Latina, we're conditioned in slavery to be invisible. So when we come out and you say talk about yourself, we go, wait, I don't know. And then that 10 seconds is part of the 30 seconds of the halo effect, because you know 30 seconds when a person walks in the room, you know you're gonna hide them or not. That's the halo effect. So I wasted 10 seconds thinking, I don't know anything about myself. And some of you met me, I'm dope. So now the first question we ask is, tell me about an interaction you have with family or child. I work in a school district. If you can't answer that question, you should not be here. Right? And so that's really important. And then we also talk about, and I said this earlier, honoring the voices of BIPOC leaders. Don't just bring me to the table and give me a head nod. I'm a leader, I know how to do that too. If you are not going to accept my suggestion, tell me and explain why. Because sometimes we just don't have the money to do it. I get it. Every time I go to buy another pair of shoes, I'm told we don't have the money to do it. I don't know how that's possible. Right? But if you don't have the money to do it, you don't have the money to do it. But don't just have people come to the table and give you their ideas. Explain sometimes why you can't do it. The community is not on board. Our board is not on board. There are reasons. Let's be honest with our people. I again want to thank everyone for coming out today just to listen to, partly listen to me, which I'm sorry about that. This amazing panel, my friend Maria, and again, thanks again.
She's gonna wait before I can give her another hug, but okay. So, speaking of community and relationships, there are a few names that we didn't get to acknowledge earlier, but you know, we have the time, so we're doing it right now. Catherine Berger, Chair, Board of Legislators. Emily Saltzman, Deputy Director of Operations for Westchester County. And former Deputy County Executive Kevin Plunkett. And now, without further ado, Maria, the second Maria.
Good morning. Good morning. Good, that was my test if you could hear me with my mask on. Because coronavirus, it's everywhere. You don't want to hear it, but it's true. Okay. You don't want to hear a lot of things that are true, but we're going to talk about them today. Thanks for coming. Okay, my name is Maria Smith Dowd-Trush. Don't worry if you see it printed and you struggle with it. I do too. It's a new name for me too. And I'm not saying it right either, but we're all going to struggle together. So Maria Smith Dowd-Trush, my pronouns are she, her. I am a native of this amazing county. I'm from Mount Vernon, New York. And yes, thank you.
Yes, it is true. And I'm also the director of the Westchester Center for Racial Equity at the YWCA White Plains in Central Westchester. And it is really my honor and great thanks to Jan for inviting me to moderate this panel and be a part of this, this wonderful report release. I just want to kick it off with a few thoughts and then some definitions, just so that we're clear on what it is we're here to talk about. So one thought I had just now sitting down, this is gonna shock Jan, I did not talk about this in advance, but just now I was being inspired, and I thought about meeting the owner and founder of the Racial Equity Institute, which is a Greensboro, North Carolina-based Black-owned management consulting firm. And I met this woman at a panel, and she said, no one owns a nonprofit. No one. So just think about that as we talk about charting an anti-racist path in the nonprofit sector in Westchester County. Because no one owns this work, all of us are accountable to getting this right. You cannot tag this on one person. This is all of our responsibility if we are in agreement and alignment with the truths and values and principles that come from doing anti-racist work. It will be hard, it will be uncomfortable, it will not be a linear path to what we call our North Star, but if we are all owning it together, we will share in that discomfort. We will learn from each other while we're struggling together in the darkness, and when we hit the light, it will be a collective community victory. So no one owns a nonprofit. Another thing I thought about is I'm also a Black feminist and have read the Combahee River Collective statement way too many times. It's like a mantra. I read it every week for strength. And one of the things this group of Black women came together and said is if Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all systems of oppression. There's this idea that if we do for those who we have discarded, I will somehow lose. I will lose something. I can't afford to give that up. I don't want to share my power. I don't want to talk about my privilege. I don't want to make access to opportunities and share resources. But you know what? This is not a zero-sum game. We're participating in what is called a solidarity dividend. We all benefit from anti-racist practices as it connects to human rights and as it connects to, I think the case was made very well by Dr. Connolly, our economic outcomes, our health outcomes, and also just our overall quality of life. So without further ado, some quick definitions. If they are not legible, I can read them, no problem. So racial equity, these are not in your programs, it's okay. We'll listen together, and they will come up. Racial equity is the condition that would be achieved if one's racial identity no longer predicted, in a statistical sense, how one fares. When we use the term, we are thinking about racial equity as just one part of racial justice. And thus, we also include the work to address root causes of inequities, not just their manifestation. This includes elimination of policies, practices, attitudes, and cultural messages that reinforce differential outcomes by race or that fail to eliminate them. And CAPD stands for the Center for Assessment of Policy Development. Oh, come back, Racial healing, that's the work I do. Big surprise, I am not a DEI practitioner, but I love some racial healing. It is a tool that can facilitate trust and build authentic relationships that bridge divides created by real and perceived differences. Did y'all know your nervous system perceives threats that are real or perceived the same way? Saying, isn't that fascinating? So, that's interesting. It is a process that restores individuals and communities to wholeness, repairs the damage caused by racism, and transforms societal structures into ones that affirm the inherent value of all people. You are all inherently valuable, not because of your titles, the places you work, the money in your bank account. By virtue of being here as a person, you carry inherent value. And our systems of oppression would lead you to believe otherwise. Finally, I have two definitions of racial justice. The first, racial justice, the systemic fair treatment of people of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. Racial justice, or as some people refer racial equity, but I think there's a clear difference, it goes beyond anti-racism. It is not just the absence of discrimination and inequities, but also the presence of deliberate systems and supports to achieve and sustain racial equity through proactive and preventive measures. That comes from Race Forward, one of the nation's largest and premier nonprofit that works on racial equity, and has been doing so for the past 40 years. They have another definition. Racial justice, because after 40 years we evolved. Racial justice is a vision and transformation of society to eliminate racial hierarchies and advance collective liberation, where Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders in particular have the dignity, resources, power, and self-determination to fully thrive. So we've got those definitions. I'm gonna let them sit for a little bit. That's a lot of words, a lot of things to consider. Maybe some thoughts are jumbling up in your mind. But just wanna leave that as the backdrop as we hear how all of these different concepts connect to and with the work of the report, the work that these fantastic people do every day. And it is my pleasure to introduce them and to start the panel officially. So, first we have not Theo Oshiro, if you're looking at your programs, but to my right we have Michelle A. Nicholas, who has been introduced before from PCSB Bank. And then next to Michelle, we have Karen Cheeks Lomax, CEO of My Sister's Place. Following, Jerandi Martinez, Executive Director of the Community Resource Center. Followed by Joanne Dunn, Executive Director of the Youth Shelter Program of Westchester. And lastly, Tiffany S.W. Hamilton, Chief Diversity Officer and Associate Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion right here at Pace University. Let's give them a hand. And now, right before I ask the first question, because honestly, you've all been sitting back quite nicely for some time, I invite you, if you so choose, to get fully present for the panel, right? So, before they come up to make their statements and answer some questions, I do this sometimes when I've been sitting for a while, and I just want to make sure I'm here. Maybe my thoughts are going off and wandering in other places, and I'm thinking, what am I going to have for lunch, and what's my next meeting? I hope this doesn't go over. You know, I don't know if they're on time. Are they on time? We let the people of color plan the agenda. They're going to be late. All these thoughts you're having, it's fine. They're here. I feel them in the air. So I invite you, if you'd like to engage your body and like perk yourself up, push out the thoughts you don't need, and center yourself back into your body. Real easy. You can literally move your arms. It's okay. It's not yoga, but it's just enough stretch. Push out the stuff that's like distractions, and then bring yourself back to focus. Real easy. Look at that. Yes. Yes, fantastic. Move around, move your neck. Let's settle in, right? Don't want anybody being present but not really being here. We need you here, right now, for what these people are going to say about the work we've done with this report. So just take a moment and join us here. Okay, first coming up to the microphone to share about the Board Governance and Board of Directors section of the report is Karen Cheeks-Lomax, CEO of My Sister's Place.
Good morning. So good to see everybody. It's good to see so many faces I haven't seen in 100 years, it feels like. But I'm sitting here listening to these sisters talking about racial equity, leadership in nonprofit, what NPW is doing. I think Jan's going to be able to run for governor now because everybody knows her name and the work that she's been doing. But I want to acknowledge this panel, which goes without saying that this work has been going on for years and years and years. And some of you are just awakening to that, right? You're just figuring that out now, but you're in the room. So I'm going to take that. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about My Sister's Place, where we've been, why I think this work is important, and how each of us has to lead with our heart. We have to lead with our heart. We have to lead with empathy. We have to lead with humanity. I think we all are going to talk about that in different ways. By the way, money earned in Mount Vernon. I'm from Mount Vernon as well. We have to call that. I'm going to talk a little bit about me, and I'm going to only take that 5 minutes that they gave me. I think it's important for you to understand how challenging this work is. Anahita said it. Maria said it. Michelle said it. It's hard work. It doesn't come because you wish it to happen. Everybody sitting in this room, if you think that this is important, you should stay for the rest of it. If you don't, don't bother. Because there are going to be moments where you're going to sit and say, what am I doing here? How am I going to change the trajectory of a board? How am I going to get people to really buy in, including staff, that this is important? So I commend you for being here today. I'm excited to see so many of you. I thank you, Maria, for remembering that quote. It's about 2 years ago where is Maria? 2 years ago, I was talking to her about humanity and all the work we were doing, and she obviously saved it and took it. So I want to thank you for that and get going. Michelle Nicholas talked about from the inside out. Nobody's going to do it for you. You have to decide as an organization, as a board, as an institution, as city, government, as the county of Westchester, that you're going to do this work because it matters. Dr. C, thank you for giving us an overview of that body of work that I actually thought everyone had, because I'm answering a question from that body of work, which is the report that I think is done so beautifully. Really take it. It is a blueprint, but it's not the blueprint. It's going to give you some ideas about what have people been doing around this work, but it's a blueprint if you then begin to say, I'm going to engage it in that way. So one of the essential questions that I was asked to talk about today was, how do we promote racial diversity on nonprofit boards through board governance? So that's a difficult and challenging question to ask because it doesn't happen like that. I've been working on this. I've been the CEO of My Sister's Place for almost 20 years. And I've been working on this really from a grassroots perspective for the last 12 or 13 years. And so that takes time. And I think someone said it earlier, maybe it was Dr. C, when she said, you just have to keep pushing. And there are days that you're just gonna have to keep pushing because the awakened aspect, or the people that need to be awakened, haven't been awakened. So as I move, to talk about this question, I want to share a bit of history. 2016, My Sister's Place embarked on this thing called the strategic plan, and you all know what a strategic plan is, or at least you think you know what it's going to come out, what's going to come out. You're going to take stock of the organization. You're going to take stock of how much money you have in the bank and your programs and salaries and all those things. And yes, we did that. So from 2016, we created a strategic planning committee that had board and staff on it. In my head, I said there has to be a component of race and racism. And everybody said, what is she talking about? Well, if you are in a leadership position as a black woman in an organization, you see it every day. You see it when you go to the store. You see it when you have meetings. That invisibility that someone talked about earlier, it's here. So in my head, I was thinking, how do we transform this organization this way? And yes, I want all of those other things to happen, but how do we make this come together? Well, it was a very challenging, but really good experience, because I kept race within the fabric of every conversation, and that was very difficult to do. It wasn't an easy thing to do, but I kept it there. And what I realized in 2016, I knew this before, but I was charged now with, as a black woman, how are you leading? How are you really leading? Yes, there are things that I'm going to say that are relevant to me as an individual, but how am I leading this organization? And so I realized that I could not effectively and transparently lead my sister's place as I had been, without incorporating all that I knew to be true about systemic racism. Because it shows up every day. Our clients come in, they come from the various systems that they come from, our staff come from wherever they're coming from, I come from my experiences. And I think that it was important for me to stop and take stock of me as a leader and where we were going to go. Here was this opportunity. What I realized that unless my sister's place and our board, unless we were going to change the framework and the lens that we were looking at all of this work we were doing, and the need, and to acknowledge, right? Acknowledge is to stand there and say, I get it. But to stand there and be in conversation with this thing that makes you feel uncomfortable, that makes you feel like that they're not talking about me, I'm well-meaning. No, to acknowledge that this has existed is a really challenging thing. So that's what I was thinking about, and that if we didn't acknowledge the need for racial equity, we would never be mission forward. Forget the mission. People throw out the mission, but the real mission is making sure that we're doing the work in a way that is transparent, but moreover, embraces humanity. So it was an awakening on, as I said earlier, on so many levels, and certainly for me, and it was a turning point from my sister's place. I was inspired and validated by the Race to Lead series that I think Dr. C talked about, the 2016 report that came out, and then there was a subsequent 2019 report that came out and that said, Race to Lead Revisited. And I have to tell you, it was like I won the lottery. I picked up that document, I read it from cover to cover, 2016, and said, my God, here is the empirical evidence that racism has impacted, has devalued, has impeded the ability for people of color to move within systems in nonprofit. Now, that report didn't tell me anything I didn't know, because it's a lived experience. I know what these things are. But what it did for my board of directors and other people, I would assume, it gave the empirical data evidence that this was a thing, right? And what I will say here is that the empirical data is always important. The lived experience already knew that, but the two were never going to meet. And what my white colleagues think is that I need it to be documented. I need it to be in paper. I need to have a report. It needs to be in a great folder, and then it's real. So when I had that document, I knew that I could move in a very different direction with my board of directors, with my staff, and with anyone who would want to talk to me about it, because I was so amazed that this thing had come together. And my colleagues, you've heard, talked about this had been for 40 years. I think it's the Building Movement Project has been around for 40 years. But I was new to it. And I went down the hall just waving this paper going, it's here, it finally happened. So I had a tool to begin to develop these conversations, and I knew this would be a resource for further conversations within the board. Gave it to them as part of the board packet. You want to know how you do this? You give it to them as part of the board packet. You say we're going to, have these conversations, and we did other work before that. But when you really want something to happen, you have to stand in the face of it and say this is what we're going to do. I also introduced in 2020 the 1619 Project, which many of you may know was part of the New York Times Magazine project that really looked at systemic racism from a perspective of a historical perspective. And nobody wanted to hear that. What are you talking about? Where's the relationship between our mission and what Hannah Nicole Jones is telling us? By the way, I had to say, she won the Pulitzer in 2020 for that work. And when you read that magazine, you can still get it from the New York Times. It's a big magazine. One of my colleagues here, Kim McNair, helped me. We put it on podcasts because people learn differently. And it was a lot of information. And we did that, and we sat with it. We talked about the history of this country and how generational wealth became a thing, and how the invisibility. We talked about marriage laws. We talked about all these things that bring us to this day where we are still on uneven footing. And so these are the things you have to be able to do, and it was uncomfortable. We've all said that. It was uncomfortable, but you have to be willing to say, if I believe it, if I'm leading with my heart, this is what I'm going to do. I think it was important for me to really, as we learned from the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond, I had, back in 10 years ago, had tried to get funding for it, was able to get funding and send staff and bits and pieces. We were able to send staff to go to it because I felt like everybody should at least be exposed to it. I wanted people to understand this social construct of race. That you have to know your history in order, our history, it's not mine, it's our history. We have to know it so that we can move together as a collective. I made a commitment with the support of the board of directors to invest in a series of training. The board was right on with me. They went through a series of trainings, not fully awakened, but willingness to be in the room and to say, well, wait, she's trying to tell us something. And obviously, I talked before about the People's Institute, who helped us to really begin to understand, even staff, racial inferiority, racial superiority. What are those concepts? And really be able to understand what they are, because we're living with them right now. Everybody in this room, somebody said earlier, I'm not sure if it was Maria or Dr. C, access, gatekeepers. I'm at the top of the organization. I gatekeep. I do that all the time. We have to acknowledge and recognize our power as we do this work. There was an urgency and necessity in my mind that required us to move forward in this new way. But trust me, there was trepidation and there was fear. What happens if this thing doesn't work out? What is it going to mean that I put myself out there? I'm having dinner table conversations with people that I would never ever reveal certain things to. And so you have to understand what that is when a person of color, is talking about very intimate details of race and how it impacts them, invisibility. How you talk to your colleagues at work where there is a conversation. I remember going up to the county one day, I won't say what administration, but because everybody's in the room, but we had a conversation. I'm looking at you, Kevin. It wasn't during your. I saw Kevin's face like, is it me? No. In fact, when Kevin left, I wrote him a note. He was one of the people that I could always have a conversation with. So I've always appreciated that about you, Kevin. But they're talking to my colleague. I'm the CEO, but they're going to the person who's white. and they're assuming that that's the CEO. I've gone to so many fundraisers where people go, "Oh, hi," to someone white, and not recognizing that this black woman is the leader of this organization. We all know this. The people of color sitting in this room, this isn't surprising to them, but it is maybe surprising to you, and that's part of the change that we have to see as we move forward. As Michelle said, it is our responsibility to do this. No one's going to come in and do it for us. So I talked a little bit about that urgency and what I wanted to do, and what did we do? We started to onboard our staff in a different way. We wanted them to at least understand this. And then that strategic plan that I talked to you about in 2016 took hold, and we finished up in November of 2018. And November of 2018, there was this group of folks, staff of my sister's place and board, that created this thing called the Guiding Principles. The Guiding Principles are bad. I had nothing to do with them. I had nothing to do with bad, meaning good, right? I had nothing to do with them. They were the responsibility of the people on that committee. I'm going to call her out again. Kim McNair was part of that original committee back then. And they were struggling in that room about what it was going to say. I got a nice document, and we framed it, and I said, this is great. But what we realized, we said in those guiding principles, some people call it a guiding statement, value statement, that we were aspiring to be anti-racist, that we were aspiring to be anti-oppression, that we were collective, and we were, collaborative, and we were anti-ableism, that we were anti-heterosexism, we were anti-classism, we were we laid all this out. And then we realized we had to get to work. So for 6 months, we had they were on the board, they were all framed, and then I said, all right, so what are we going to do? And what did that mean? It meant we had to bring our people together. Because everybody doesn't hear or vision what Karen's thinking, but I'm leading the ship. Ship is in the middle of the ocean, and I needed to turn. And so that's what we began to do. We created an anti-racism group, and we're now looking at affinity groups, and we're meeting with the board. And honestly, and I know I'm running out of time here, we've done some good work. And we're in conversation and in relationship with our board. Now, it's taken years, right? This doesn't happen overnight, but I think Michelle was talking with Dr. C. In relationship, that's the only way you change things. Because if you're just kind of talking at people and people are talking at you, you can hang it up. My sister's place board is 75% white. You're going to see in that report that that's true for statistics here in Westchester County, and nationally it's in the Race to Lead. So you'll see that's a very typical board makeup. And I say that just so you understand what the conversations were like and what the positioning could have been. As a result of the many conversations over the past few years, the board is looking differently at aspects of board service that include recruitment, onboarding, and fundraising. In fact, we had a strategic planning meeting at our last board meeting with our staff who are a part of the strategic planning committee with board members. And there's a commitment to be in relationship with one another and to really talk about these issues and how we can onboard new board members in a different way. And I've said to my board, we've been doing this for 3.5 years. We onboard staff with guiding principles. There are team interviews. People have diverse ideas about, why do you want to come here? Because this is what we're doing, and we want to make sure that you can be a part of this. So we are currently in the process of shifting how we approach board leadership by including diverse voices of our staff as experts and community resources. We can't forget our staff. They know more than we do. They're out in the community. They know board members. People say to me all the time, oh, I can't find board members. Look at the Black and brown and indigenous people in front of you. They know everybody. but they're not having those conversations. I know I have to get going, right? Sorry. But our commitment, our agency's commitment to becoming an anti-racist organization is acknowledged by its prominent position on every board meeting agenda. And that was important to me, and that's important to the board, even when there's nothing to be said. We have it. We have a consulting firm that is now working with us to bring diverse voices from our community into our boardroom, into our fundraising, and that is one of the ways that people say all the time, how do we do this? Well, you have to be thoughtful about it, and you have to change how you've always done it. Bottom line is, it has taken years to get where we are right now, and I am thrilled that I'm standing here in front of you, even reporting this out. How we define what a board member looks like and what they bring to the table is changing. It used to be if you could bring a check, you had a $10,000 check, you could be on the board. I'm not so sure if I have 10 people who bring $1,000 checks, I can have that same money, but I brought a community of people to the table. Just want to say one final thing to you, two final things. Frederick Douglass said, if there is no, you guys probably already know this, if there's no progress, if there's no struggle, there's no progress. You cannot think you're going to do this and there's no struggle. There's absolute struggle, there's uncomfortableness, I'm not sure I want to do it, but you have to keep doing that. And last, I want to thank NPW for this. I also want to talk about, just briefly, with the trusted partnership and vision of our consultant, Milta Vega Cardona. Milta has walked by us, with our board, with me, with our staff, with our affinity group teams, all of that, for the last really 5 years that we've had her engaged. I've known her longer than that. You need help sometimes. You can't do this on your own. And then with the leadership of our own Kim McNair. Where's Kim? You have to raise your hand. Stand up, girl. Those of whom have been mentors to me, we will continue on the path to humanity. And I actually say this, and I want to leave you with this. Mentorship isn't that the CEO is mentoring someone else. Mentorship is that the people who work collaboratively with the CEO can mentor her. I could not have gotten here without Kim and so many of us that have believed that My Sister's Place could be the best that it could possibly be. So I want to thank you all for being here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. What I'm taking from that is leading from the heart, and all the different steps that were taken. Next we have, and before we bring up Jorandi Martinez from Community Resource Exchange, we have the time. Everyone, we've got the time. Don't worry, you said what had to be said. Everybody's gonna have the time. So Jorandi, please, we're looking forward to hearing from you from the report on diversity to inclusion.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hold on. Let me take this off so you can hear me. Can you hear me? Yes. Excellent. As a person who's worked in the nonprofit sector for 15 years, I'm very grateful and extremely proud to be here on this panel talking about an anti-racist path forward. I have to think about when I started this work in leadership. I was 29, terrified. And my predecessor, who's an incredible leader, an incredible woman, person of color, says to me, don't worry. She looked at me, she was like, don't worry. You could pass for white. You speak well, you have light eyes, light skin, light hair, you're gonna be good when you talk to donors and your board. And she was using the tools and the reality that she had at the time to kind of guide me. And I sit with that. I think that all the time when I'm speaking to anyone. How do I pass? But I don't want that for my new team members, the people who will succeed me. We have to move and set the bar higher for this nonprofit sector. So when I'm leading in my organization, I don't want to say that to my team. I don't want to say speak better, learn how to sit at the table, learn about diets, because you're going to be talking about them a lot. I want them to feel comfortable, feeling safe, and included the way they are. As people of color, people with lived experiences for the community we're serving and empowering, I want them to lead in that as they are. So when we're talking about diversity to inclusion, I just wanted to set that tone, because I think that it's more than just, adding a bunch of people of color to your staff and to your board, and then there, we did it, we did the work. No. It's so much more about making sure that everyone has a voice at that table, has a voice in that room. And when you're looking at your decision-making process, board members play an important role. They do. But they're just one element of that multiple elements that it takes to make an organization work. So we have to bring in our staff, our frontline staff, our client members, our community, to help us make the decisions that will help us lead this organization. And it takes time, and it takes work, and I get it. It's like, we slow down, oh my God, I just want to get this plan done. But if we don't bring those voices to the table and help them feel included, we're not going to do the work. And if we're sitting at a table and the people of color are sitting there quiet, nodding, we're nodding, they're probably not feeling safe enough to speak, safe enough to be heard. So it's really important for us to really consider our power, whether we're in leadership, whether we're the CEO or the board chair or a board member or a major donor or even a head of department. We have power, and we have to hold on to that, maybe look inward, silence a little bit, let's just listen to what other people are saying, what their opinions are, allow for them to feel respected and heard so that we can actually make the right decisions for our organization. Again, and Karen really highlighted what we could be doing as a nonprofit organization, revisiting our mission and guiding principles. Again, everything has to be intentional. Let's bring in the people who actually care about our mission and know it and understand the community so that they can inform what we're supposed to be doing, what our values are, what our guiding principles are, how to set a strategic plan together. Because it's not enough to say that we're doing this work, we really have to be intentional. We have to develop a formal process. We have to be, setting a plan, establishing policies, putting together a strategic plan that we can revisit to see if we're actually getting to the goals that we've committed. And then an action plan that will assign different roles so that everybody knows what they're doing, when and how, and at what time. We can't stress enough, and this is all in the report, so I'm gonna just skim through it so that we can just keep having this amazing discussion. But professional development is so critical, as Karen highlighted. Obviously I think we're all investing in training for our teams and in training for our staff and our board. But we have to dedicate training for this anti-racist work. Because if we don't understand it, and we don't actively commit to it and do it over and over and over again until it's embedded in our minds and hearts, we're never gonna get anywhere. And that investment will make your organization better. It's worth the money, it's worth the time. And if you're worried about capacity building, look at the train the trainer model. Send your community leaders, your staff members, to get trained on how to train their peers. This is an exciting time. It's an exciting time for nonprofits. It's important work. I'm thrilled to be able to have this conversation with our staff, with our board, with my peers, and feel supported in this. But we have to be intentional, and we have to commit to this work. It'll never get done if we're not really intentional about it. So thank you for supporting and being here. This is a first step. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work, and I'm just glad that we can actually commit to that.
Thank you so much, Durandi. And a note to all of you that at this time, the report is available online at Nonprofit Westchester's website. We decided to make a good choice for the environment and our bottom line and not print them out for you. So we hope that you will thank you for that. Thank you, sustainability of the planet. Yes, yes. So I hope that you will take some time after this time together to look at the report and continue to offer feedback on it. It is on Nonprofit Westchester's website. You should not look at it right now, because right now we're bringing up Joanne Dunn, who is the Executive Director of Westchester Youth Shelter Program of Westchester, and you do not want to miss a word of what she said. So my announcement about the report being available is a test of your commitment to priorities of the moment and your attention in the present. This is your first test in anti-racist training. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. Don't read the report right now, everyone. Okay? So, I mean, I have written down some thoughts, but I guess today I'm just going to go off cuff. Is that okay? That's okay. I'm a church girl. I'm a hip hop girl. I am just that girl. I just feel like that, right? Hey! Okay, that's fine. But, I mean, we've talked so much today about the work we need to do inside and out. We've talked about the constant journey. And we've talked about being awakened, and now that you're awoke, what does that mean, right? And so I'm here to talk about the out, right? We moved from diversity to inclusion, and now I move to the investment piece, right? And so I'm a hip hop girl, right? And they say cash rules everything around you. Green, get the money, dollar bill, y'all. I had to do that. Okay? So, I had to do that. So, many of you in this room, of course, you work in nonprofits. Nonprofits are the backbone of our county and of our country. However, many of us are trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. And if you talk about a BIPOC-led organization, you're trying to make $1 out of 5 cents. And so as the first Black woman to run an organization, I face this challenge every day. And so when we talk about access and opportunity, and we talk about relationships, when you've never had the opportunity to be exposed to it, you can't figure out how to go get that investment. So many times you're trying to get in a room that already has a gate or a door that's closed to you. And so if we truly talk about we want to invest in racial equity, we have to talk about racial justice. Because at that point, we've moved the needle to fairness, right? We've moved the needle to make sure we're investing in those communities of color, in those nonprofits that are truly, truly doing the work. And most BIPOC organizations are small organizations. And so yet, you talk about procurement processes, you talk about grant applications. That's a challenge for many organizations that don't have that infrastructure. And so part of my work today, and I'm not going to talk about the problem because we all know the problem, right? I would say that this problem is not new to us. It might be new to some of you, but we're true to it because it's always been a problem that's existed for us. So capacity building and government and foundation funding goes beyond just breaking the mantle of implicit and explicit bias, but it really goes to creating access and opportunity. It really goes to not only when we talk about capacity building,
in regards to fortifying the infrastructure for Black and Brown run organizations, we also have to fortify the training, right? So not only training organizations about institutional racism, but also focusing on the skills that implement those strategies, all right? And so as we continue to go forward, we also need to talk about how do we fortify those organizations with our money, right? With that coin, that's how we call it in our organization, with that coin. Because honestly, without that coin, the work can't get done. And so when we talk about this work, there's a lot to do. There's a lot that we need to do. And I will say, I'm not going to go to the report. I don't want to read this report. But in the report, it says that two things need to happen from here. We need to look at capacity building. We need to focus on funding streams. We need to also look at funding anti-racism, anti-bias work. And we need to enhance the ability for organizations of color. And I would also say this is that government and philanthropic foundations need to also do some work to invest and come and learn about communities of color, right? And so sometimes we invest in an interest, but not necessarily the impact of an organization. And so I would say the work needs to go from not only from your seat and internal in your organization, but it needs to go out. It needs to go out into the communities, and we need to do that work. So I thank you for hearing me today. You will read the report. It's on page 23, 24 that I come from, but investment is critical, and we need access, we need opportunity, and we need a listening ear to activate. All right?
Thank you so much, Joanne. $500 to the white-led nonprofit leader who at their next gala repeats the lyrics to Cream, Casuals everywhere around me. That will come from my pocket directly. I want to see it. Okay. Got to get it inside of you. Some real mics were dropped on that verse. They were. Okay. We are going to move on to Michelle A. Nicholas, who will talk about supporting people of color to lead. And I want to make a quick note that in your program, it does say we will have table conversations. In the interest of time, we're going to try to have as robust a back and forth and Q&A with the panelists, and then we'll see where we land with the table conversations. But just prepare yourself that something you thought might happen will not happen. Because something you put on paper that would happen might not happen. Okay? That's test number 2 in your anti-racist training. Michelle.
All right, so it's me again. So my colleague Theo should have been here, but due to unforeseen circumstances, he can't make it. So I'm going to send his apologies. He wrote something. I wish that I could do what Joanne just did, but I'm just going to read what he had. Keep it flowing. So Theo was supposed to be, specifically, he was talking about supporting people of color to lead. I'm a person of color, and I'm leading, but it's taken some time, but we'll get to that in a minute. We know that BIPOC community has been excluded from leadership positions in the nonprofit sector. And data shows that it's not due to the lack of experience, expertise, educational attainment, or other credentials. The real problem is that there must be real change. We must be in a position to promote equitable leadership outcomes and provide the advancement for Black and Brown leaders. How do we do that? Let's start with opportunity and access. In recognizing and addressing issues surrounding power and race, we need to develop policies that ensure opportunity and access for all leaders to be trained in anti-racist and anti-bias practices. Also, have honest conversations about the impact of explicit bias as well as the everyday norms that foster implicit biases. We also need to look at changing recruitment and hiring practices. The responsibility and burden for change should not fall on BIPOC people. Instead, let us focus on hiring and promoting with an equity lens and identifying organizational biases that serve to exclude BIPOC people from leading from leadership positions and other positions. Here are a few questions that should be asked, and I found these questions to be so interesting. How or who in the organization contributes to the establishment of criteria regarding who is qualified to fill the leadership positions? How are job descriptions developed? Who has the input into hiring and promotional processes? And who makes the ultimate decisions? And as we think of inclusion, let's bring voice and respect to the table, recognizing that if there are a limited number of voices at the table, it hurts our ability to change. I encourage you to commit yourself to listening, right? Listening. Consider bringing in staff of all levels and providing a safe space for them to share expertise with the board, executive staff, as they will play a really great role in helping your organizations. The goal is to avoid the top-down only approach, as BIPOC people have been systemically excluded from the top. It is not lost on me, as I recall being the first person of color to be hired and lead various organizations in various capacities. Organizations that have been around for decades. And it is not lost on me that I'm the first person of color to join PCSB Bank in the senior leadership role. But I applaud the organizations that didn't just check the box. These organizations did the work, like the bank. And if you can just give a round of applause for my boss sitting right here. For recognizing the need for change. It's not what we think should be done. It's not what we guess should be done. It is what needs to be done. And I'm encouraging you right here, remember, it needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And yes, there is a slide and a person making her way. I just want to, real quick, I'm noticing a theme. First, Karen? First, Joanne, person of color. First, Joanne. First, director of the new Center for Racial Equity. I just want to take a deep breath and acknowledge that when you break through a ceiling, be it glass or cement, that poop hurts. It hurts a lot just to ascend to a level on which more pain may be inflicted. So I just want to acknowledge all of us here who work through that and work on behalf of the betterment of our organizations, our communities, and really our whole county and our humanity. So I just want to acknowledge that first. And what it takes to be first. We don't have to look all the way to DC for Judge Jackson. We've got 5 of them right here, and we need the support right here. So we will turn it over to Tiffany S.W. Hamilton for 4 key recommendations from the report, which is available online, which you have not looked at yet because we're still here. We're still here. Okay.
Thank you. Good morning. Bless your hearts. The same energy I get from you all will be the same energy I put into this 4 minutes together. Good morning. There we go. And here is test number 3 as we continue this great work and begin to speak about the recommendations. I want you to think about where you are in this room, where you are in this building, where this building is physically located within our county. And I want you to think in your mind north. Right? And on the count of 3, I want you to point to where north is. Think about where you are in this room, where this room is on this campus, and where this campus is as it relates to the county. And on the count of 3, typically I have you close your eyes so there's no cheating, but I want to ensure that this is an inclusive process, right? So on the count of 3, I want you to identify north. 1, 2, 3. Now look around the room. You see that there are various fingers pointing in a variety of different directions. And you may be asking yourself, Tiffany, what's the answer? Well, given that I'm a native of Kansas City, Missouri, and just got here 3.5 years ago, I can't tell you where north is. But what I can tell you when I'm asked that question, north is always up for me. I do that because when you think about how we chart an anti-racist path forward, all of us are going different directions. But the point of these recommendations is to point us to a North Star so that we can be driven and have a focused guidance of where we're going and how we plan to get there. The 4 recommendations are there for you on the screen, but the reason why I started with the North Star is because some of you already may be sitting in the seat of discomfort wondering how will I lift this on my way back to my respective organization. And the thing I will share with you, the last 2.5 years has gifted us with the expediency that we need to face this. Almost a year ago, actually a year ago on April 8th, the CDC declared racism as a public health threat, a threat to public health. And what that means is that same energy that we use to tackle COVID-19 is that same energy that we need to use to address this threat to public health. That is a conversation I had with my president and all of his VPs and deans, that the same energy, the same resources that we found, the same signage that we found, the same partnerships that we created to quickly respond to that threat to public health is the exact same energy that we need to keep as we chart this anti-racist path forward. Sit with that for a minute. COVID was extremely uncomfortable, and it still is uncomfortable for a lot of you in your organizations. Many of you had to learn Teams, Zoom, and all sorts of technological platforms to fix the issue. And many of you couldn't wait to race to the finish line and rip that mask off, get proximate to folks again, but yet you've not gotten proximate to your communities of color. Take off your mask and return to the airline so that you can visit your summer homes and get approximate to the sun and the sand. I saw you because I took my husband to the Maldives last year. Yes, I did. And when you prepare to go on those international trips, you research the language, you find the food, you figure out where to go for all those excursions, and yet in the county of Westchester, you can't name 5 Baptist institutions, 5 barbershops, 3 mosques. Think about that. Think about that. The last 2.5 years has been a gift of what you can do. It has been a gift of what you can do and who you can do it with. You know, my sister spoke before me and talked about being from the hip hop generation, and I just want to remind you that I know him as Nipsey Hussle. Told us that the marathon continues, and what I challenge you to look at is when you think about these recommendations, it's marathon work. We can't sprint to the finish line. And in order to prepare for a marathon, you gotta go to the gym. Because a lot of our organizations have experienced what we call atrophy. I ruptured my Achilles a couple of years ago playing powder puff football. That's a whole nother TED Talk. But one of the things that I had to do in my recovery was go through physical therapy, as alluded to earlier by Dr. C. I did aquatic physical therapy and all sorts of physical therapy, and once I took that boot off, I recognized one calf was bigger than the other. Because one had been in the gym and one had not. A lot of our organizations, some particular roles within our organizations have been in the gym, like these roles that we occupy. But we've not yet challenged other areas of our organizations to go into the gym and reduce the atrophy and get the muscle and endurance that we need to keep the fight. Why? Because the marathon continues. We don't have to wait till another black or brown body is murdered on the screen and advertised in all of our Twitter feeds and timelines for us to continue the work. And so when we think about the North Star, the last 2.5 years has gifted us with what we can do and how this work must continue. And we've got to change the narrative. We got to stop talking about black and excellence as if they're mutually exclusive. Black excellence is not the unicorn that you're looking for. It exists and you have to get approximate to those spaces. We talk about relationship. Relationship for me means I break bread with you. You don't just invite me to speak when it's Black History Month, Latinx Celebration, Heritage Month. Relationships are developed over time. If you think about the 5 people that you texted in the last hour or the last week, those are relationships that matter to you. Those are relationships that you get approximate to very regularly. Those are relationships that you spend time where you get in the mud and we come out the mud together. It's not just about making yourself approximate, but what does a relationship mean to you? And how do you establish those relationships over time? And, you know, the recommendations are on the screen. I think I said enough, but I want to leave you with this because we talked about a concept, gatekeepers. And I looked to the right and I was like, man, I'm on the demolition team because gates shouldn't exist. See what I'm saying? When you talk about an agitator, you think about your washing machine. Them clothes don't get clean without that agitator in the middle. I need some folks that are willing to be agitators and willing to be on the team of demolition to take down the gates, or even humble yourself enough to be a bridge builder. And this is what we know about a bridge. A bridge gets you to a destination, but sometimes you gotta be willing to be the plank. Going into these spaces and leading these organizations with the emotional intelligence to know that it's bigger than me. What profits Tiffany to gain everything if I lose my soul? We talk about leading from the heart, but what does it profit you to gain all of this but lose yourself and your community still suffers? So sometimes it's about reducing the gate and being humble enough to be the plank. So when we talk about doing this work, I challenge us all to adopt the mindset of being the plank. Because in the end, as the song said, we gonna be all right. But it's bigger than you, and it's bigger than me. So with that, I yield the floor for the discussions of the report.
Retire this microphone. Everybody can sign it and we can just put it somewhere. Because I don't want to speak on it after that. I don't know if we're at a summit or if we're at a revival. I should pass it around. Come on, nonprofits, get your checkbooks out, get on Zelle. I want to announce this morning the launch of the Anti-Racism Westchester County Fund for Healing and Development. We need $5 million this year. Just put it out there. there, you know, PSAB workshops need to happen, racial equity workshops at the center need to happen. I need to launch my healing circles and my racial healing fellowship program that ain't got no money. I need y'all to put some money in the fund so we can support this. All right, that's not on the program, but I felt like if I put it in the atmosphere, maybe when we meet back in 2 years and check on something, that could potentially be something y'all like, called a measure. We can measure our success to goal on that 5 million. I just put it out there for y'all. We also added to the gala tracks. The gala soundtracks are getting better and better. I might come to some nonprofit galas if we get some of these tracks. Nipsey Hussle's out there. We got Kendrick Lamar, Pulitzer, I believe. Okay. So we're gonna ask a few questions. Y'all feeling all right? Yeah. All right. Executive decision by the non-executive on the floor that we're not gonna do the table talks. We will find a way together in community. This is your final exam for this prerequisite course of anti-racist training. Can we make it up as we go along, trusting the process? That's what we're gonna try to do here, right? So, following our North Star. And I saw some of y'all was gonna walk into the wall, walk into the glass. My North Star was Tiffany, so good luck for y'all. I know where I'm going. Okay, so I'd like to start this question specifically to Jerandi and Tiffany also because of the energy in the space. But I wanna, we had talked about some questions we would talk about giving this and giving the report. And I'm looking at these 4 recommendations: long-term racial equity staff development, embed diverse voices, support leadership opportunities, customized initiatives, commitment to change, and advance racial equity support by BIPOC-led nonprofits. And this is a risky question, but we'll see how it goes. And Jerandi, I'm really moved by how brave it was for you to share that personal experience of your leadership ability being measured against a standard of really whiteness. And so the question is coming from that and responding to what we really are defining as inclusion in our sector. And so the question is, what about this work do you feel in charting an anti-racist course, looking at the report? How are we able to have and use this report as a blueprint to start having the conversation, not only about BIPOC leadership and support for anti-racist work within organizations, but really the naming of the organizations as being racialized themselves? How do we start it's a hard conversation, but what do you feel we have as tools to start to say, I'm noticing a culture here that is an antithesis to the anti-racist culture we're trying to build. How do you name the antithesis to that anti-racist culture? And I think you just press, yep.
Thank you so much for that question. And, you know, I really think it matters who's in the room, right? And so we have to be able to go back to our organizations. And I know obviously after this, we're all gonna go back to like scurrying to the next meeting and like there's a deadline and we have a grant due but just remembering that this is important work. It's going to take a conversation. And you know, was your board here? Was your board in this room? And if they are, that's fantastic, because that's an ally that you can now take to your board of directors, you could take to your staff. I have staff here. And we say, hey, how are you feeling? How are you feeling? Do we need a measure check? Like, do we have to have a survey, an anonymous survey for how we're feeling in the organization and how we're feeling about our work and an anti-racist path forward? And I think that that's a first step, is having that conversation, maybe putting together an anonymous survey, nothing long, nothing crazy, but having to, or just have the conversation if you're comfortable enough to do that. I know it's not easy, so I'm not sure that that's our first step. But if we can take this conversation, this panel, whatever recording we have out of it, share it with the rest of our staff or the rest of our board or our peers, our allies who weren't in the room, and then, use that to do a plan, even just set an intention for your commitment to this work. We have to set an intention because it's going to be easy to forget about it, like in a minute. It'll be easy. I'm like, what are two after this? And even me, and I'm sitting on this panel. So I know that what I'm gonna do is talk to my staff and my board and say, hey, look, we sat on this panel, it was amazing. We should probably look at what we're doing in our organization and see if we feel that we've really set our intention and that we're doing the work that needs to be done. Because I don't know that we are. That's why we're here. That's why we're all here, right? I think we need to set that bar higher. Back what I was talking about before. We have to set the bar higher. I'm thinking about who's coming in next. I'm thinking about who's new in our board and our staff, because they are going to see the tone that you set, and they're the ones who are going to be the next generation of your organization. And hopefully we're better for it.
All right, so real quick, a couple things that I'll share. Number one, you got to embed it in your, take me back up. First thing, here's the emotional intelligence piece, right? We have to be okay with the fact that we don't have all the answers, especially as the leaders, right? When you go back and you take an inventory of who's in the room and who's not in the room, you got to be okay with the fact that, you know what? I was today years old that I realized we are white as white. And I don't have all the answers of how to transition that. I was today years old when I realized that we have a lot of cisgender men leading our organization, right? And we have to be okay with recognizing that. Doesn't make it wrong, doesn't make it right, it makes us aware. That's the second piece. This isn't about creating a space of, I got you. Oh, I knew Tiffany didn't, or I knew Linda didn't, right? It's not about creating a space of gotcha, but creating a space of awareness. Grandmother said, if you knew better, do what? Do better. And so when you have that realization and take that inventory, communicate it. You know what? This is what I recognize about our organization. I don't have all the answers, but I do know that all of us have a VIP reservation to one particular room, and that's the room for improvement. And that's the room for improvement for our organization. So with that, I'm going to bring in some folks to do an environmental scan to create a safe space for you all to share about your experiences. That's that investment in your time, that's the investment in its talent, and that's the investment via your treasures. Bring someone in, do the environmental scan, take that work, and use that report as your North Star, right? Because I know folks are looking at, well, how does that look? What do we do? You want to take the be okay not having all the answers. Take the temperature of your organization, create a safe space for those that have chosen you as your employer to share about their experiences. And then based on those results, embed it in your policies and your practices, right? If we're talking about creating spaces where people belong and they feel included, is that in my performance evaluation? Is it in the evaluation of our board members? That they're setting an agenda that reflects our commitment, all of those things. And so if you establish that I'm okay with not having all the answers, I realize that we have room to improve and increase representation, take the temperature, I'm going to create a safe space. You don't even have to tell me how you feel. Tell this outside entity that's going to give me what I need to make sure that we're doing what we're supposed to do for who we're supposed to do it for, and then we're going to embed it and infuse it in our organization.
Thank you. And I just have two more questions to set expectations here. And this one I'd love to hear from Joanne and Karen especially, because we're here charting an anti-racist nonprofit, Westchester County. And I remember when there was an incident at Starbucks years ago in Philadelphia, and Starbucks around the country just shut down and did training. And I'm like, oh, we should just stop doing things and invest the time. But yet, you're working with people who are experiencing domestic violence. You're working with young people who are depending on your staff, on your people to show up and be with them and educate them, having come through various systems themselves. So in a sector that serves other people, in a world where the demands for our services seem never ending and ceaseless, how are you able to embed the time for these conversations, for this training, for the engagement with the board? How are you able to manage your own staff's capacity to do this work and also connect with the communities you serve at the same time? Go ahead, Joanne.
I guess I'll start just in regards to how do you take the time. And I guess for me, I'm not even thinking necessarily about like the board or the leadership, but I'm thinking about the young people we serve, right? And I think about BIPOC communities, right? And so I think that we have shunned a lot of the voices of the people we serve in nonprofits. So a lot of times we will parade, and yes, I will use that word, we will parade those that have been our success, right? They've gotten a job, or they've gotten this, and they've gotten that, but yet if we dig deeper into really the people we serve, we see a lot of the system stuff that has really messed up or created barriers for the people we serve. So I know, particularly for me at the youth shelter, it has been highly important to just listen, to really just listen to our young people, to elevate their voices so that they have a safe space to share. How did they even get here, right? How did you end up in my doors? Because I run an alternative to incarceration program. So young people are locked up with me. And young people are not born as criminals. They got here some way, somehow. And so just to get that understanding of how they got here is important for me. And then also for our staff, it has been an opportunity to engage, right? Because I think that we can't heal when we don't know. And we can't move the needle when we haven't yet really shut up, right? And so for me, it has been an opportunity to sit back, engage, and really allow a space, a safe space for my youth, for my staff, and for my community, right? To really share their challenges, share their successes, and then use that as an anchor for me to go out. Because I think what's also important is that when you run nonprofits, we have been so busy. I've worked nonprofits my entire life. And so a lot of times we have almost been pit against one another because we have to fight for the same funding stream, but we're doing the same, our missions run parallel to each other. And yet so many times we have superficial relationships. And I think that we need to create more allies, and more relationships, because I think, I'm gonna get biblical right here. The Bible says, one can chase 1,000. Two can put 10,000 to flight. And if we really did that work on us and really came together, we really could be powerful. And so I think that a lot of times, though, we need to shut up, we need to listen, we need to engage, and then we do need to activate. I'm going to keep using that word because a lot of us will leave this room and we will go back to doing the same thing that we've been doing. We will go on autopilot. But if the 2 years haven't gifted us that we need to do something different, then maybe you're in the wrong space and place. Because now it is time to move. If you don't know, and it's okay. Because guess what? We as BIPOC people, we don't know, but we live it every day. And so we just keep going as much as we can, and we undergird each other. And so that's what I was just saying, Maria. I mean, I know it's not, perfect scripted, but that's what I would say. Karen, it's your turn.
I think that, I think that it's important to give space and give counsel to your staff who are experiencing, we also know that our staffs are 60 to 80% people of color, BIPOC people. And so I think it's important as we come together as organizations, as we have these conversations, to be real and to provide, I think, as we just heard, space for people to talk about their diversity. Recently we just had, I mentioned Milta Vega Cardona, who's been our consultant for a number of years, and we brought our staff together and we celebrated who they were.
as we began to do the work, you know, we know we're going to get to a certain place, but we spent, I don't know, a day or half a day just talking about, I am Afro-Cuban. I am from, you know, Trinidad, but my grandfather is from China. I am from this, and people looked at each other for the first time and said, I didn't know that. I didn't know that about you. And so I think it's really important as we do this work to begin, you know, we've been talking about in relationship with, in conversation with. If your staff don't know each other, if they don't begin to see the humanity in the face that sits next to them each and every day, or on these Zooms and all these various things, we won't move the path forward. And I think you're absolutely right about activate. Then we don't just sit there with that information. We begin to move as a collective. And when people recognize that they're on the same side and we're not competing for whatever it is, and there's some justice and equality in how decisions are made around promotions, et cetera, and we have to learn all of that, I think we'll be a better organization.
Thank you so much. And so, no surprise, my next question is to Michelle J. Nicholas. And being on NPW's board and being so closely connected to this work, this report, which is available online, which you can look at in like 10 minutes. You did such a good job. I just want to, and we know from its conception of what it would be, that it would be a living, breathing, dynamic document. So we're not even looking for this report today when you download it to be perfect and complete. But in reflecting on the process and this panel today, do you feel like there's anything missing that you just want to bump up on the agenda for when we revisit, or just share now that, like, I wish we could have included this or dug deeper into that? Exactly, yes, the conversation.
Honestly, the mere fact that we're all here is it. The hours that we put in for this, to create the report. These women right here. We have put in a lot of work. But it will be lost if you don't do the work too. So for me, it's not adding anything in the lines. It's adding your voices. Yes. We have to do this together. I am so hyped from Tiffany sharing about the COVID, about those signs. Because I'm in signs right now. I'm still in the signs. I'm looking at the mic. I don't even want to touch it. We did all of that work for COVID. COVID came 2 years. Racism has been how long? So, if we're to add anything, add your voices. As you leave, activate, right? There's somebody that needs to hear what happened today. They're not in this room. But you be that voice, be that ambassador, so that it's not lost. And though, we're, correction, I was going to say we're nonprofits. I still got it. Honorary. As nonprofits, you know that when you get $1, that dollar multiplies because you're helping a community. Utilize the same thinking here. You're here. This knowledge that you've gotten, share it, multiply. That's how it's going to work. And if you feel uncomfortable, yes! Yeah. These are uncomfortable conversations that we're going to get comfortable with. So that's what I encourage you to do. Thank you so much. God bless.
According to my watches, it is 10:57. Woo woo for us, on time with it. Come on, somebody. It's busted every day. think I have to, I'm sorry, Jan, you have to come up here. I'm so sorry. Y'all stay standing. She hasn't seen it yet. She has to receive it. Stay up, stay up.
I have to say this. So, in the Black community, we call, you hear us call sis, right? You hear that, right? Yeah. So when we call you a sis, that's a term of endearment. That means we love you. You in the heart. And so Jan is a sis, okay? Jan is a sis, and I say that to her all the time because Jan, she not only listens, she's not only in it with us, but she's there on the front lines. And I think that that's where we need everyone to become a sis and a bro. Because once we get in that space, then we really in love. We family then. We family. And I say that because Jan will say to me, Joanne, no. I'm not, don't do that, don't do that. And I said, but you're a sis, Jan. And she said, but I'm white. And I said, what's that got to do with it? Because it's your whiteness and your privilege that opens access and opportunity for us. And so Jan is appreciated, she is loved, and she is in the sisterhood.
So some of you might be asking, how do I become a sis? How do I become a fan? Oh my gosh, I want to do it too. Don't let me out. I know, the FOMO was real, but let me tell you, I will give you an example of how I knew Joanne's words are true. We were on a call preparing for this panel. And it was a fun, you can imagine how fun this call was. You wish you were on Zooms like this every day. And something came up where it was like, someone should do something about that. You ever been in a conversation, someone should do something about that. It would solve the problem. And Jan, of course, being a strategic, visionary leader, was like orchestrating who should do the thing to solve the problem. And we all sat there like, okay, girl, all right, And literally 10 minutes later, after a pause, Jan said, I want to apologize for my previous white savior showing up there and just kind of like telling all of you what to do when that wasn't the right thing to do. And so for the humility, for the self-awareness, for the work you've already put in, your work in this didn't start with this report. It didn't start with you being the head of nonprofit Westchester either. This has been lifelong work for you as well. And I think when people are asking, how do I, it is not a one-shot silver bullet train to getting there. You've got to build the relationships. There's some tussles, there's some, I don't know, Jan, you want to know with that? There's a whole lot of conversation that happens to build a culture that can contain anti-racist work in this county. And so as all of us are doing this work, leading in this work in our organizations, what we know is that when you're Jan Fisher and you stand up and take a leap of faith, when you become that plank, some folks gonna plop right on your back and say that you're the reason they fell off the boat. Some people are gonna say, I don't wanna hang out with Jan anymore. We're not friends anymore. I didn't know you did that with those people. There are things you lose and then there's things you gain. And we just wanna thank you for taking the risk. We wanna thank you for being true to your values and your principles. We want to thank you for doing more than putting additional seats at the table. You expanded the room. Yes. You built a banquet hall for this work. We're going to fill it up. We're going to fill it up and activate around it. And we just want to thank you for your leadership.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm very humbled by what everyone had to say. I want to thank them. This took so much work on their part. I do want to again acknowledge the NPW Board of Directors for believing in this and for taking a leap of faith And I have to again acknowledge Maria Imperial, who I saw Maria maybe 15 years ago at an event, and she became my North Star, and I'm so happy she's here today. And to these women up here, and to Theo, who is supposed to be up here, men, women, however you identify, everywhere in between, there is a place and a space for you at the Nonprofit Westchester table, and thank all of you, and also to Amy, Suzanne, stand up please.